Hello and good night, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Today I'm going to share with you a story from the Quran. As you know, I have started my YouTube channel, and while I am sort of running behind a little bit on some of my videos, I decided to pick up the pace and offer you one of the stories from the Quran. Um, of course, one of the reasons I am actually I've decided to do these videos is because I feel like the stories of the Quran really speaks, helps to have the Quran itself speak, and of course it's my interest and my desire to share with you, the public, just a little bit about what the Quran is all about, to sort of have it speak for itself. Inshallah, or God willing, it resonates with you. For today, though, I will be sharing with you guys the story of Moses and Islam. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. At the time of Egypt, when him and the people of Israel were enslaved by the then Pharaoh, or leader of that nation. But before I sort of jump right into it, I want to just say something regarding the. I want to quote something from the Quran regarding, in general, the stories of the Quran. This is what Quran has to say about its stories. It says, there is in their stories instruction for men endued with understanding. It is not a tale invented, but a confirmation of what went before it, a detailed exposition of all things, and a guide and mercy to such as any as believe. So right off the bat, the Quran talks about the stories that it shares with the believers. And essentially, it says, you know what? These are not invented tales. They're not myths. They are real accounts of the lives of men and women. And they're supposed to be a source of guidance for us. And God willing, inshallah, a source of mercy, especially for the people who believe in the Creator. So on that footnote, I'll begin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The Prophet Moses is actually one of few people who is known to have been spoken to by God himself. And it really puts the Prophet Moses in a really high position among the prophets of Islam. And in fact, he is actually carries a title of Kalimullah. And of course, that's an Arabic word that means one whom conversed with God. So the one who conversed or talked with God. Now, of course, there are other prophets that have spoken with God. Of course, well-known Adam, and of course the Prophet Muhammad as well when he went into heaven, etc., etc. Okay, he's not the so Moses is not the exclusive prophet, but he carries this title. Interestingly enough, in chapter 7, Allah declares war against, or sorry, I should say God. By the way, Arabic, Allah is the Arabic word for God in the Quran. So whenever I say Allah, just know I'm referring to God. And I'll be using that a lot. Sometimes I'll interchange between the two. But in the Quran, Allah declares war against those who seek to exalt on the earth, as Pharaoh did. This is the verse speaking. And the verse continues to say that those who behave arrogantly on the earth in defiance of right, then will I turn away from my signs. Even if they see all my signs, they will not believe in them. And if they see the way of right conduct, they will not adopt it as the way. But if they see the way of error or wrongdoing, that is the way that they will adopt, for they have rejected our signs and fail to take warning. This is an interesting verse because when we get through the entire story, we see how this verse becomes extremely relevant, because in the story, the Pharaoh is given many, many signs. And of course, you have to keep in mind that signs is really a word that really denotes revelation or guidance. So the Quran is known, has many terms of reference. It can be referred to as the light that God sent down. It can be referred to as revelation, but it's also known as a book of signs in that it points to something. It points to that which is truthful. And of course, in the story, we see that in the life of Pharaoh, that he receives many signs, but unfortunately he turns away. And as a result, unfortunately, he does not benefit, right? You know, the Quran, the verse says that they will turn away from my signs. Even if they see all of the signs, they will not believe, right? And if they see the way of right conduct, they will not adopt the way, right? So this happens to be a classical story of just this verse talking about people who are arrogant. Arrogance is it's an interesting topic on its own, and inshallah maybe I might do a video on that as well. But God says that Pharaoh exalted himself in the earth and made its people into castes, oppressing one group of them, slaying their sons and sparing their women. He was one of the corruptors. And we desire to show favor to those who were oppressed in the earth, making them leaders, to make them also inheritors and establish them in the earth, and to show Pharaoh and Haman and their soldiers from them that which they feared. So the Quran made it very clear that this oppressive behavior that was a part of the Egyptian society, God wanted to change that. And God wanted to bestow this favor on the children of Israel. And this is how Israel actually became one of the chosen people, right? God wanted to confer his favor on them. It is said in the traditions that the Pharaoh had a dream, right? And in the dream, he saw that a piece of fire came from Jerusalem and covered all the houses of the Egyptians. Now, it burned the houses of the Coptics ones, but the houses of the children of Israel remained safe. And of course, when he woke up from this dream, he was really troubled by it. And he was asking his people and his ministers and his dream interpreters, what does this really mean? So in his anxiety and his fear in learning about what it could possibly mean, he decided that, you know what, we're going to implement the old policy of killing, slaying the Jewish newborn male child. Okay? And of course, they would keep the women or the female child alive. In this way, in doing that, they weakened a people because, um, obviously they didn't have the gender, the strength that was in gender in the male. And so this is one way in which the pharaohs sought to weaken the people that was under their control, and that was what they did with the Israels. But the story of Moses began, and God said, so we sent this inspiration to the mother of Moses. Suckle thy child, but when thou hast fears about him, cast him into the river, but fear not nor grieve, for we shall restore him to thee, and we shall make him one of our messengers. Now, what's interesting to note here is that Moses' mother seems to be a very spiritual woman, to the point where God is telling us in the story that He communicated this whole thought that I just read out by way of inspiration to the mother of Moses. So she's probably, maybe the modern word would be saintly. Okay, saintly. And she's of that caliber. So this is the stock from which Moses comes from. Then the people of Pharaoh picked him up from the river. It was intended that Moses should be to them an adversary and a cause of sorrow for Pharaoh and Haman and all their host of men of sin. So far the story is saying God gave inspiration to Moses' mother to continue to raise the child, but once this policy of killing the male newborn children goes into effect, if you have fear for his life, then what you would want to do is just put him into a casket and put him on the river. And sure enough, the time came when that happened, and she did that. And of course, the story says that in the hadiths, or in the Islamic traditions, they say that when she had done that, the wife of Moses was at the riverbank with her female servants, and they actually noticed the basket as it came closer and closer and eventually halted the side of the riverbank. Now, when the wife of Pharaoh saw the basket, she said to her servant, go see what that is, and that's how they discovered the child. Now, the wife of Pharaoh said to Pharaoh, she said, after she picked up the child, she fell in love with it, and she wanted to keep it. She said to him, well, here is a joy of the eye for me and for you. Slay him not. It may be that he will be useful to us, or we may adopt him as a son. And the Quran says, and they perceived not what they were doing. So this is really the start of the entry of Prophet Moses into the Pharaoh's house. And it's interesting because it's at this point that we realize that we see in the story that, Pharaoh was this great and powerful Pharaoh, and he felt that he could prevent God's plan, even though he saw it in his dream. And of course, I forgot to mention this, but what's interesting is about that dream was actually the foretelling of Moses himself. And of course, there are hadiths that say that even among his ministers, they were aware that this newborn child, who was supposed to be a prophet, would come in the time of Pharaoh to topple the Pharaoh. And so he was very much afraid of Moses' arrival. And so that was really his plan to do away with Moses. But what's interesting, as you can see from the story, is that God has a very interesting sense of humor in that he brought his prophet right into the house of the Pharaoh. And what's interesting is God demonstrates his power by showing us that he can protect the most weakest and vulnerable of his creation. And this is, of course, a message to those of us who believe in that we have to remember that whatever God intends for us, there's no one who can change that. There's no one who can undermine those plans. Okay? So you guys have to keep that in mind. Remember, this is a story the Quran is telling us that these are part of the signs of God. And they're a source of mercy and guidance for the believers. So when we see things like that, we have to reflect very carefully on them. And hopefully, God willing, inshallah, it gives us strength. So God takes his most vulnerable prophet into the very house of the Pharaoh. Now, the hadiths say that Pharaoh and his wife actually never had any children. I don't know whether she was barren or he was barren. I don't know. But at that time, they had no children of their own. It may have been possible that one of them could not produce children, and so that might have been a reason for that. The Quran then says, but there became a void in the heart of the mother of Moses, and she was going almost to disclose his case, had we not strengthened her heart with faith so that she might remain a firm believer. So God's saying, there became a time where Moses' mother, she is at this point, and it's interesting because, she's very close to God. She's a very pure woman. She receives inspiration from God. And so her faith is strong. But when it comes to a mother's love for their children, or in this case, her child, it goes to show you that there is a strong connection there. And of course, she became depressed over the issue and was about to expose the fact that he was Jewish. He was a Jewish child. But God said we strengthen her heart with faith, just so that she can remain firm. And she said to the sister of Moses, she said, follow him. So she came, of course, the mother saying this to the sister. She said, follow him. So she, the sister, watched him in the character of a stranger. And of course, they knew not. And we ordained that he refused suck at first until his sister came up and said, shall I point out to you the people of a house that will nourish and bring him up for you and be sincerely attached to him? Thus did we restore him to his mother, that her eye might be comforted, that she might not grieve, and that she might know that the promise of Allah or of God is true. But most of them do not understand. So Allah has, or God has fixed a plan in place where he strengthens the heart of Moses' mother, and but he realizes that it's getting to the point where, you know what, she's about to crash. She can't really take her. She's at her limit. So he he initiates the plan, of course, where she says, well, have her be followed, and then have the sister let them know that there is someone who can take care of her. But of course, this entire plan, I'll take care of the child, but the entire plan hinges on the fact that it's by God who commanded the child not to breastfeed or not to eat at all I should say not to breastfeed from anyone. The entire plan rests on that single command. And it's important to recognize that, because what it reminds us is that God isn't just some creature in the sky. That God is real. That God intervenes in human affairs. And just like how we act, God also acts. And we see this, of course, in the story. And this is also another sign of God. And God says, yeah, that she might know that the promise of Allah is true, but most of them do not understand. So what's interesting about that last part of the verse is God is making a commentary that most human beings, they don't really understand that kind of intervention in creation. They don't see it. They don't understand it. It's not something that they can put under a microscope. It's not something that's scientific. But this is how it is. And so it became that the sister was able to approach the house of the Pharaoh and say, hey, listen, the child obviously is not feeding, but I know someone who can be a source of love and comfort for him and also be able to feed him. So the hadiths or the Islamic traditions say that when the child was given to the mother and the mother started to breastfeed the child took to the mother's breast, and so she became the first woman that Moses fed from. And this is how God secured the place of Moses in the very house of the Pharaoh, in the very house of his adversary. The Quran says, now when he being Moses, reached full age and was firmly established in life, we bestowed on him wisdom and knowledge, for thus we reward those who do good. Now, there became a time when Moses entered the city at a time when its people were not watching. And the Quran says that he found there two men fighting, one of his own religion and the other of his foe. Now the man of his own religion appealed to him against his foe, and Moses struck him with his fist and made an end of him. So he killed him. His reaction, of course, he says, this is indeed a work of shaitan, or the devil, for he is an enemy that manifestly misleads. So right there and then Moses prayed. He says, O my Lord, O Allah, I have indeed wronged my soul. Do thou forgive me. So Allah forgave him and He is the oft forgiven, most merciful. Now we have in Islam that if a person kills another person by accident, that it is possible to obtain forgiveness. There's a rigorous, I believe it's like 3 months of seeking God's forgiveness, etc., etc. However, the act of killing someone without just cause, or in the case where it's not, in the case where it's accidental, or sorry, in the case where it's not accidental, then God says very categorically in the Quran that the repayment or the reward for such a thing is hellfire. I just want to make that very clear. So, of course, just to re-summarize, so Moses is in the city, Egyptian city. He sees two people arguing, one of his religion, another person that's not of his religion, Egyptian. And in the course of the argument, I'm sure things got heated, and he struck him. Now, it turned out the man died instantly. Now, and in that moment, Moses turned to God and asked God for forgiveness, and God says that He forgave him. And he said something interesting he says, "O my Lord, for that thou hast bestowed thy grace on me, never shall I be a help to those who sin." And it sounds like a very simple verse because, we would hope that, Moses would be someone who is good and righteous. But I believe it's a little bit of a foreshadowing here, because he's saying that, never will I be someone who is oppressive or who would deliberately do a sin. And he seeks refuge with Allah from ever being that type of person. Essentially being someone who's arrogant, or who would allow their arrogance to get them there again. But the Quran shows that human beings are very, very forgetful. And the Quran says that, so he saw the morning in the city looking about in a state of fear, when behold, the man who had the day before sought his help, called aloud for his help again. So he called to Moses again. Same guy from the night or the day before. Moses said to him, "Thou art truly, it is clear, a quarrelsome fellow." Then when he decided to lay hold on the man who was an enemy to both of them, the man said to Moses, "O Moses, is it thy intention to slay me as thou slewest a man yesterday? Thy intention is none other than to become a powerful, violent man in the land, and not to be one who sets things right." And it's almost as if God is speaking through this man, because Moses only yesterday was saying, "O my Lord, for that thou hast bestowed thy grace on me, never shall I be a help to those who sin." And clearly he recognizes that this man is troublesome and keeps getting him into trouble. And not only that, but only a day before he struck this man, and he's about to strike the man again. So whenever I read this verse, I feel like God is speaking through this man to Moses to say, "Hey bro, did you not realize what you just did yesterday? You're about to strike me again, or strike another person again. You could kill this person." Right, so thy intention is none other than to become a powerful, violent man in the land, and not to be one who sets things right. And this is also a foreshadowing, because later on, this is exactly what Moses becomes chosen for, to set things right. But it so happened that the man came, the Quran says that there came a man running from the furthest part of the city, and he came to Moses and he said, "O Moses, the chiefs are taking counsel together about thee to slay thee, so get thee away, for I do give thee sincere advice." He therefore got away therefrom, looking about in a state of fear, and he prayed, "O my Lord, save me from a people given to wrongdoing." Then when he turned his face towards the land of Madian, he said, "I do hope that my Lord will show me the smooth and straight path." So Moses is evidently, he is the son of a woman who is extremely close with God, to the point where she is one who receives faith and inspiration. And so he's obviously very religious. We see him through the course of his life praying to God. And of course, at this point, because of the fact that he accidentally killed a man previously, he now has to flee Egypt. And they say that he goes towards this land called Madian. The Quran says that when he arrives to Madian, he comes to a watering place, and there he found a group of men watering their flocks, and besides them he found 2 women who were keeping back their flocks. And of course he said to them, "Well, what is the matter with you?" And they said, "Well, we cannot water our flocks until the shepherds take back theirs. And our father is a very old man." So naturally, Moses, so he watered their flocks for them, and then he turned back to the shade and he said, "O my Lord, truly am I in desperate need of any good that thou dost send me." And it's interesting, when this actual verse, I actually remember when I watched the actual story of Moses, the Christian version, of the story of Moses, when he actually gets to Madian, he sits by a tree and he actually says this exact same prayer, and that's when he sees the ladies coming. Now, so that he's finished this prayer, the Quran says that afterwards one of the women came back to him, walking very bashfully. And she said, "Well, my father invites thee that he may reward thee for having watered our flocks for us." Because what happened was, to give you a little bit of a background, the hadith say that when he did this kindness for them, they were able to go back a little bit earlier than what normally is the course of time that they return. So when they got back a little early, it turned out that the father became very curious, and of course he asked him, "Well, how come you were back so early?" And that's when they told him. I should probably mention, for those of you who are not familiar with this story, you're not Muslim, whatever, if you're looking at the story, the Islamic traditions say that the man, or the father of these women, was actually a prophet, and his name was Shuaib, Prophet Shuaib. And so he meets the Prophet Shuaib. And so he goes with them. And the traditions say that as she is about to lead him back to the home, he tells her, he tells her, would you mind me walking ahead of you? And when she inquired, why, he said, well, I am from a people who do not look at the private part of the private, or the private parts of women. From, he was referring to her buttocks. Right? He says, we don't look at the private parts of women. And so he said, I'll go ahead of you and you can direct me in whatever direction we're going. Now these days you'd get, Moses would get himself into a lot of trouble if he said that to women today. Right? Anyways, so when Moses came, and he told Shoaib how he got there, what happened. Shoaib was very sympathetic to him, and in the course of that conversation, one of the daughters, the one who actually came back to bring Moses back to the home, she said to the father, she said, "Oh, my father, engage him on wages. Truly the best of men for thee to employ is the man who is strong and trustworthy." The Islamic traditions say that at some point he asked the daughter, Shoaib, the father, asked the daughter, maybe after dinner or whatever, and maybe in their private conversation at some point, he says to her, he says, during the course of the dinner, you did say to employ him because he's both strong and trustworthy, but why do you think he's trustworthy? And she said that, she says, well, we know he's capable, but the fact that he's trustworthy is the result of the fact that he wasn't interested in objectify me. If that, I mean, it's a modern term. I shouldn't say objectify, but essentially that's what she was saying. She was saying he's someone who guards his chastity by, not. The inference was by not objectifying her or looking at her in ways that is inappropriate, and so that was the argument she made. And of course, the father then says, according to the Quran, he says, he says to Moses, well, I intend to wed one of these my daughters to thee, on condition that they'll serve me for 8 years, but if you complete 10, Moses, it will be a kindness from thee, but I intend to, not to place thee under any difficulty. And thou wilt find me indeed, if Allah wills, one of the righteous. Well, Moses says, well, so at this point, he was very impressed. The prophet Shoaib was very impressed by what his daughter said about Moses. And it seems like this is part of the motivation behind why he wants to obviously because he wants to marry his daughter, obviously for the fact that, here is someone who's strong. But I mean, in every field of employment, an employer always wants to hire someone who's also very trustworthy. And this is really kind of what's really motivating this relationship. And of course, Prophet Shoaib seals the deal by offering one of his daughters for marriage. And of course, the daughter accepts. And the arrangement between them is that the dowry, or the dowry would really be the time working for him for a minimum of 8 years. But he says, but if you can do 10, you know, this would be a great kindness on your behalf. So Moses responds by saying, well, be that between me and thee, whichever of the two terms I fulfill, let there be no ill will. Be Allah a witness to what we say. So of course, Moses accepts the term and begins the marriage process, and this is how he kind of becomes rescued, as it were, from his situation of having left Egypt. He's completely poor and vulnerable and is in an insecure situation. And so this is how he finds security, through the Prophet Shoaib, and through, of course, his prayer, which was answered, and of course through his conduct, his sense of decency and his sense of kindness. The Quran says, now when Moses had fulfilled the term and was traveling with his family, he perceived a fire in the direction of Mount Tor. And he said to his family, tarry ye, I perceive a fire. I hope to bring you from there some information, or a burning firebrand, that you may warm yourselves. So he's leaving Prophet Shoaib's house with his wife and his family now. They're traveling to establish their own place and home. But he sees a fire and he says, oh, maybe there's people there. Let me go and first go and meet and introduce myself to them, and maybe I can bring back some fire as well. Now when he gets there, the Quran says, but when he gets there, he hears a voice from the right bank of the valley, from a tree in hallowed or sacred ground. And the voice says, O Moses, verily I am Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Now do thou throw thy rod. Now, it is said that when Moses did throw the rod, and it started to move. The Quran says, as if it had been a snake, and he turned back, retreating, without retracing not his steps. So it seems like the initial introduction was okay. He's like, okay, Allah, okay. But then when Allah asked him, what is that in your hand? And he says, oh, it's my staff. And God asked him to throw his staff. For him, it got a little bit weird because the staff started to move like a snake. So he bolted out of there. It says, the Quran says, and not retracing and retracing not his steps. He was so afraid he didn't even run the way he came in. He just, it's like, no, let's do it. He got out of there. Okay, so Allah yelled out to him. He said, he says, O Moses, it was said, draw near and fear not, for thou art of those who are secure. So Allah had to just call him back and just, take it easy, Moses. It's okay. You are one of those who are secure and safe. You don't have to worry. he says, he said, "O my Lord, show thyself to me that I may look upon thee." And God said, "By no means canst thou see me, Moses, but look upon the mount. If it abide in its place, then shalt thou see me." What's interesting in the verse, when you when you go into this verse, the part that says never, particularly the word that says never can thou see me, or by no means can thou see me, when you actually look at some of, if you go into the commentary, Islamic exegesis says that that word by no means really means never. It's a literal translation, it means never. Sometimes translations come by using the term by no means, but it means essentially by no way can you see me. Now, it's not to say that God cannot be known or cannot be seen or understood in other ways, but in this particular case, what it means is by no means can you see me with the naked eye. But God says, "But look at the mountain. If it stays in its place, then will it thou see me?" Now, when his Lord manifested his glory on the mountain, it shattered into dust, and Moses fell down in a swoon. So Moses, of course, was eager to see his Lord, and he asked him, and of course God said, "Well, I can't really be seen, but if I could be seen, maybe not even too long those lines. Like, well, just look at the mountain base. I'm going to reveal myself to that, you know, to give you a kind of peep of what you're really asking, Moses." It's essentially what that is. And God revealed himself to the mountain, so to speak, and it just shattered into dust like that. Now, this event was so dramatic for Moses that he couldn't believe it. It's like seeing something that you have never seen or could ever imagine happening. Imagine a huge, enormous mountain just turn into powder just like that in a second. It was too much for him. So the Quran says that the impact of it was so dramatic that he fainted. Some say in the tradition that he didn't faint, that he died and came back to life. Some said that he became unconscious and came back to life. But there is no, the wording in the Quran doesn't indicate death. What it indicates is the word that's used for actually swoon is sa'iq, right? Or it means thunderstruck. Now, this word sa'iq actually comes from another root word which means sa'iqa, and sa'iqa means thunderbolt. So, in order to say that he was struck by this overwhelming unconsciousness, he was struck by it, like that of a thunderbolt, and afterwards he became conscious and sort of regained his consciousness gradually. When he came back to consciousness, one of the things that Moses says, he says, the Quran says, when he recovered his senses, he said, glory be to thee I turn in repentance, and I am the first of those to believe. Now, I don't think when Moses says, I am the first of those to believe, he's not saying, I'm the first of those to believe, which is kind of what the sentence is really saying in a literal sense. He's saying, I'm the first of those to believe in God. But that's not what he's really saying. What he's saying is, I'm the first of those to believe in this experience that I've had of the lesson which you're teaching me, which is that you cannot be seen. I wouldn't be able to see you if you tried to reveal yourself to me. I would, like this mountain, vanish. And that's really what that means. And the reason why I say this as well is because at this point, although I'm sharing you this verse in the sequence of the story, this verse actually refers to a time when the children of Israel had already been, at this point, Moses had already been commissioned as the prophet. He had already went to Egypt. He had already pronounced his prophethood. He had already become the leader of the Jewish people. And they were asking him